to make sense of this free agent frenzy, our friend who does such a great job for MLB.com and MLB Network, Anthony Castrovince, joins us now here on the Bernie Show. How you doing, Anthony?
Bernie, I'm doing well. Not as well as Corey Seager, but I'm doing pretty well.
Other than the fact that we know a lot of teams and a lot of players and their agents wanted to get something done before, if there is a lockout, before that happened, but are you surprised by the aggressiveness we've seen in recent days?
Oh yeah. I think going into the winter, none of us really knew exactly what to expect. The prevailing wisdom was that things would be pretty quiet leading up to this CBA expiration. And that if deals were signed, it would be guys, maybe desperate to get a deal done beforehand and feel like they're in a good position before what could be a feeding frenzy. When this bargaining agreement is resolved, whenever that happens to be. But instead, it's just been the frenzy's been at the top end of the food chain. It's been a lot of fun. I wrote today about, hey, if you ever want an argument for a signing deadline of some sorts in the off season, we're seeing it in real time here, kind of artificially, and yet it feels pretty real, where everyone's trying to rush to the finish line here before a potential lockout. So the lockout itself would not be fun, but the free agency leading up to it it's been interesting and exciting.
It's a great observation. It really is. And I don't know. Who knows? We still got two days as we sit here tonight or right now. I mean, it's 2 days and about 5 hours or so before there would be that deadline that could lead to a lockout. And I want to ask you, certainly the Max Scherzer contract got a lot of attention, as it should have. What are your thoughts on that? What the Mets did?
My first thought is I'm thinking back to 7 years ago when so many of us, and myself included, thought that the Nationals' 7-year investment for a 30-year-old Max Scherzer was a big risk.
Right?
$210 million in 7 years, and now fast forward, not only was that one of the great contracts of all time, and they win a World Series with Max and then get some trade value out of him at the end, but then he goes and signs for another 3 years and $43.3 million per year. Just absolutely insane. And it's credit to him, of course, and just, who he is as a competitor and as a performer. And it's also just a byproduct of, that this free agent market was so, the starting pitching has really driven it. Now we're starting to see, obviously, the big name shortstops come off the board, but from the beginning of the off season, starting pitching has been what has moved the needle. And it was setting up pretty well for Max Scherzer. It's funny because I went into the winter thinking that just because of the value of starting pitching and because of the season he had, that despite his age, he'd probably get that third-year guarantee and he'd probably get the $40 million per year. So I thought 3 and 120. And my thought was, people will think that's absolutely nuts, but I absolutely think that's what's going to happen. So for it to be another $3.3 million per year on that $3 million deal, that's just, maybe that's excessive, but it just goes to show that I guess that best sums up where we're at with this free agency. Even if you thought it was going to be kind of bonkers, it's really exceeded our expectations.
I think the Cardinals, I give John Mozeliak credit in this regard. I kind of wished for them and for the fans here that they would have gone for maybe a more elite starting pitcher. We know the cost, as you just alluded to, the costs are even greater than anticipated. I think John Mozeliak, when he kicked the tires on some of these guys, realized that it was going to be way beyond what they wanted to do. And we can question as fans whether that should have stopped them. But still, he pivoted pretty quickly and won a very spirited competition. 8 teams bidding on Steven Matz, and the Cardinals got him by giving him the 4th year. So they pivoted and got somebody who could help him. Time will tell whether it's going to be enough to really move the needle. But what did you think of that signing?
Well, it turns out it may have been the most impactful signing of the offseason in terms of what it did to the Mets, right? They were their owner, Steve Cohen, is so upset about the way that process played out with Steven Matz's agent that he then pivots to Max Scherzer, which is quite a plan B if you lose out on Steven Matz. I don't know what to make of the Steven Matz deal. I do think that there are some peripherals that point to that being a good deal for the Cardinals. There's some others that are a little iffy for me. So, like Eduardo Rodriguez was a very clear, okay, this guy had a not great season in 2021, but, all the underlying metrics seem to point to him having been a victim of bad luck. There's not as much of that with Steven Matz. There's a little bit of that, but not as much. It doesn't mean, he can't provide a lot of value. And for all we know, this happens all the time, right, where it's not the biggest deal that gets the best value back for a club. Sometimes it is, Steven Matz was certainly not one of the top, 3 or 4 or 5, starting arms in this market, but, he could provide a lot of value to them moving forward. But, the Cardinals, this is how they operate typically, right? They don't tend to go for that top of the market, spectacular splash. And I know some fans wanted them to go out and play in the deep end of the shortstop waters this winter, and it sure doesn't look like that's happening either.
No.
So, whether there's another move in the offing for the rotation, it remains to be seen. But just in general, it seems like they've prioritized the pitching and defense model over, adding another huge impact bat, at least in the middle infield. But as I said, there's other ways to do that. I think the National League DH could be a really interesting wrinkle there if the universal DH comes to pass. And, I've thrown out Kyle Schwarber as in that scenario only. Only in the DH scenario would Kyle Schwarber make a lot of sense for the Cardinals in terms of the complexion of their lineup and what he would bring to them. But yeah, that's a conversation for down the road. But for now, I mean, if you're not gonna go crazy for a Max Scherzer or Robbie Ray or Kevin Gausman, then Steven Matz is at minimum an interesting alternative.
Yeah, and I keep saying, they still have a lot of work to do. I think maybe not as much work as say Milwaukee, because Milwaukee's, you look at the 2 guys that left. Well, actually, it was Milwaukee's fault that Avisal Garcia left because they didn't give him a qualifying offer, but. But Escobar and Garcia leaving the Brewers' offense, which really needed them, and those guys for the most part came through. I mean, they're losing a lot. Like their offense over the final 2.5 months. I mean, those guys were responsible for quite a bit of it. So the Brewers probably have more things non-starting pitching to deal with than the Cardinals do. But I just hope, Anthony, just a little comment. I hope the Cardinals aren't doing the Cardinals thing, even though the Cardinals thing works pretty well through the years. Don't get me wrong, and I always try to keep that in mind. But, I use the word calibrate. They always seem to be calibrating. It's like they look at the division, and it's like, well, how many wins would it take to win this division? And they sort of make their moves accordingly. And I may be overstating that, but I hope this isn't another process of calibrating rather than just sort of going for it. And not going nuts, but going for it and being a little more aggressive.
Yeah, it's always hard to say because you want to trust their process ultimately because it has worked out pretty well for them, and there wasn't much trusting of the process at the trade deadline this year, and then lo and behold, they had a great second half. Obviously, it didn't result in a deep October run, but they were able to improve the club at the trade deadline, which is ultimately what you want, even without making that big splash. So maybe this winter will play out similarly. Only time will tell. But you're right. I do think you're right that it was a big criticism of last year's winter, where yes, they made the big splash for Nolan Arenado, but it certainly didn't cost them much, either in terms of player value or financial value. And why not keep going? Why not add depth and other needs?
Right.
So I don't know. We'll let the process play out here this winter, and then we'll let it play out next season. And ultimately, no reason not to have some trust in them, but also a little healthy skepticism mixed in. I want to, back to your point about the division. I do think you're right that I still like the way, as of today, I like the way it sets up for the Cardinals better than the Brewers, because on top of the issues you mentioned offensively, which are issues on top of issues, because it wasn't a great performing offensive team. Then you just got to think about the innings log, the huge increase in innings for their top arms in that rotation coming off the shortened 2020 season. And yes, every club will deal with that, but it was a little more pronounced when you look at Brandon Woodruff and Corbin Burns and just their innings histories. That it's going to be a big lift for them next year, and in terms of that increase. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward. Yes, they clearly have this great top end of the rotation, but those guys have their work cut out for them in terms of maintaining.
Anthony Castrovince is with us for a couple more minutes. He's always generous with his time. And Anthony, I promise you, I'm not going to ask you about every free agent signing. I'm just going to cherry pick a couple of more. Follow Anthony on Twitter at Castrovince. Castro as in Fidel, and then Vince. And you're all set.
Right.
Although you probably don't want to be linked with Fidel, but it's the best I can do.
I've used that line, man. Castro's in Fidel and Vince is in Vaughn. I don't know if either of those is a positive association, but I can make it work.
Robbie Ray got a lot of money apparently from Seattle. Seattle's pretty close, so what does that do for them? I mean, if he's comes anywhere near replicating what he did for Toronto last year.
Yeah, that's huge for them. I mean, he's a wild card, like a literal wild card in his history. He's just wild. He greatly improved his walk rate, though, and that was the key to everything in 2021. He went back to his old delivery from years ago, and it worked out really well for him. So if that's something he can replicate moving forward, that's absolutely huge for them. They needed a frontline starter, and they need another bat in their middle infield, probably at second base or third base. There's different ways they can go about it, but they are a candidate. They made a big play for Marcus Semien, a high value at 5 years, but the Rangers go to 7 years, and it's hard to compete with that. A 31-year-old Marcus Semien to go that 7th year is a big that's a big commitment on the Rangers' part. So I thought that would have been a perfect fit for the Mariners, but ultimately and understandably they weren't willing to go quite that length. So curious to see where they go from here, because they do still need more of an offensive upgrade, but they're definitely knocking on the door. They overperformed last year in terms of run differential, but they've done that a couple times in the recent past, and so they might have a good just good management there in general, but a little more talent, especially offensively, would sure go a long way right now.
Final question, I promise, Anthony. Out of all the splashier free agent moves, but actually you could select a somewhat under the radar move, or at least one that didn't draw like a huge reaction. Which move do you really like the most so far?
Well, it's I always feel like we're probably underestimating whatever the Rays are doing at any given time, and they're not spending the most money, but they've added Brooks Raley and Corey Kluber in the last 24 hours, and that's going to deepen an already very deep, young but very deep pitching staff. And Kluber, he got hurt last year, but around that injury, he pitched very well for the Yankees. So now they have that veteran presence that they were really lacking down the stretch last season. So that's not to be overlooked. It's easy to overlook, but again, anything the Rays do is not to be overlooked.
Anthony Castrovince, thank you so much for your time, as always. We bug you quite a bit. Well, I don't know if it's quite a bit, probably too much for your liking, but you're a great guest, and I just always enjoy having a chance to converse with you about these things. So again, much appreciation. Thanks.
Likewise, Bernie. Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, that's our friend Anthony Castrovince from MLB.com and MLB Network. By the way, I was thinking if we, to put these to put this all in perspective, I'm talking about the Max Scherzer contract, 3 years at an average of $43.3 million, right? Look, if the Houston Rockets can pay John Wall $44 million this season to stay away from the team, and that's true. He's told them he's ready to play. He wants to come back, and they're like, that's okay. That's okay. Enjoy your downtime. We'll let you know if we need you. Paying him $44 million for that. So, that was like, and I'll bring Matt Rocchio in here for a minute. That was one of my first reactions, honestly, to the Scherzer contract. I was like, wow, this is like an NBA contract. This is cool, because you've got NBA players, and again, more power to them. I'm not knocking anybody, but I've never seen a league that wastes more money than the ownership group, the ownership body in the NBA. You see all these guys making $40+ million a year, and I realize the rosters are a lot smaller and all that, but they will literally pay someone $44 million to stay away. Like when he offers his services, they say we don't want. I think it's best for you to stay away. So I just think it's funny. I get a kick out of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the comparison. I think that's accurate. It's just so much money. It's fun money at this point. And it's one thing when it's a sport that doesn't have A salary cap is another thing when you talk about the NBA and they do, and you're able to still pull it off. For me, it's incredible to me that the middle class in baseball has gotten even smaller, and now you just have teams that will be, or I should say, teams that will be completely outspent by the salary of Max Scherzer. That's absolutely unbelievable. It's why some players have a huge issue. It's why there's going to be some labor problems, and if that's what it takes to potentially fix an issue in baseball, I'm here for it, because that's alarming, the way that there is such a discrepancy in baseball. And so, we want to make fun of the Mets. We want to make fun of Cohen for doing the whole billionaire thing, but hey, at least he's trying.
Absolutely. And, chemistry and all that stuff does matter. But no, he's gone after it. And so, we'll see, wait and see what's next. He's got to hire a manager at some point, but I'm saying that mostly to be a smart aleck.